Welcome to a beginner's intro to Kerbal Space Program. In this series, we're learning the absolute basics of Kerbal Space Program from the point of view of a complete beginner trying out the game for the first time. Let's dive into Episode 4. Welcome back for Episode 4. So, in this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to fly to the moon. We're just going to do a flyby. We're not going to do a landing or anything like that, but this will be a very important exercise, and we're going to learn a lot of important skills that we'll use throughout our Kerbal Space Program career here. Now, in between the last episode and now, I went through and I did a couple of contracts to get some more money. And the reason is we need to upgrade our tracking station. Upgrading our tracking station costs $150,000, which is a lot, but it's really important. And it'll give us what are called patched conics, and you'll see what that is once we do our launch. And it will extend the power of our deep space network. That's our communications. That'll allow us to communicate with unmanned probes farther away and transmit science back from greater distances. That's not super relevant to what we're doing right here, but it is important to have that long term. So we're going to upgrade that. Now we're going to go into mission control, and we're going to pick up a couple of missions. First one is what I see right here. This is a really good mission. Gathering science data from space around Kerbal. Now this is a repeatable mission, meaning that occasionally this mission will show up over and over again here on our list of contracts. You're going to see we get an advance of almost 8,000 and a completion of 20,000 and a little bit of science and reputation. So this is a really good contract, and all we have to do is transmit or recover scientific data from space around Kerbal. Awesome. Now the next one, explore the moon. Yep, we're just going to fly by the moon, gather scientific data from the moon, that includes space around it, and return to Kerbal from a flyby of the moon. These have huge rewards for each stage of the contract. We get an advance of 87,000 and a completion of 162,000. So just completing this one contract is going to give us a massive boost to our funding and more than pay for those building upgrades. So let's go in and plan our mission. Now I'm going to use our orbital mission as a base. However, we're going to make some important changes. First thing I'm going to do is we're going to take more batteries with us. And we're going to do 4 of them there. We'll put them right up in there so that they'll be attached to our crew capsule, not any of the rocket that we're going to jettison down below. Now, if you remember, we upgraded our vehicle assembly building, so we have a maximum now of 255 parts. We also have a maximum vehicle mass from upgrading our launch site to 140 tons and some pretty respectable size increases. So with this rocket, we're not going to come anywhere near those limits. So from this point until you get much further in the game, you have an enormous amount of freedom and flexibility. So what I'm going to do is I like this little science module here. We've got our science module, we've got our other experiments already attached, so I'm going to make a copy of it. I'm going to hold the Alt key on the keyboard and click on it, and that'll make a copy. So now we've got 2 of them, so that's great. Well, why do we want 2? Well, the reason is really twofold. First, we just picked up that contract to get some more science from space around Kerbal. Now, there is, if you remember, we discussed the concept of biomes and situations. Like, your biome can be Kerbal's oceans. Your situation is landed, flying above, so on and so on. Well, in space around Kerbal, around the planet, there are actually 2 situations. There's flying in space low, which is what we've done so far, and flying in space high. We can use one of these to gather a bunch of science from flying in space high while we're on our way to the moon. And we can use this other one to gather science from space around the moon. So we're going to get some really good rewards from this mission. So now let's go through and going to do a very familiar looking rocket. We've seen that before. Now it's going to be a little different. First thing, we're going to check our staging as we go, and I'm going to do some auto struts on these engine parts. Sometimes the joints with the engine parts can be a little wobbly and a little loose, and this is going to be kind of a taller rocket and a lot heavier, so I want to play it safe. So I'm going to do 2 of our fuel tanks, just like before, with our swivel engine, which is steerable. Now, this is where things get kind of advanced. I'm going to use an advanced construction technique called Asparagus Staging. So let me show you what that's all about. We've got our fuel tanks. Now, we're going to be using liquid-fueled side boosters instead of solid. And the reason is we can gain some really great efficiency by carefully managing our fuel flow. So let's get this put together. So I'm going to use these struts to connect the 2 segments, and that's going to keep the boosters stable as we're flying. Now, I'm going to use this external fuel duct. Now, what this is going to do is provide some control over our fuel usage. So I'm going to attach it to the booster, and then I'm going to put the other end attaching to the central core. Now, what that's going to do is as our rocket goes off, and these engines, I'm going to stage them to all activate at the same time. As these rocket engines are going, what this little fuel duct is going to do is it's going to transfer fuel from these tanks into this tank. So these tanks are going to burn completely empty before any fuel is removed from this tank. So what this allows us to do is to fire all of our engines at once, including this center engine from the main stage, but it's going to be feeding its fuel from the booster rockets on the outside. So when I make more of these, and we'll do 4 of them here. So now I have 4 booster rockets on the sides of our main stage, and the fuel from them is going to be feeding not only their own engine, but also this center engine. And because we have 4 of these, the additional fuel drain from this one engine in the middle is going to be split up by 25% into each of these. So that's going to be a very small fuel drain, compared to the main engine that's being fed there. So we're also going to do some fins, and just to make sure that we don't have any problems with these boosters when I separate them off, falling and destroying the fins, I'm going to clip the fins into my main rocket a little bit. There we go. And in addition, that just looks a little bit nicer. And we're going to do some launch clamps. It would help if I could find them. Okay. Now we're going to rename this Moon Flyby 1. Now again, we're checking our staging. Our first stage, we're going to do our launch clamps and fire all 5 of our main engines. Our second stage, we're going to do our decouplers and jettison the dead weight of those those liquid fuel boosters, and we're going to do that when it's empty. Our third stage is going to be our upper tank and our upper engine. Last, we're going to decouple our capsule from all of this other stuff, the science experiments and that tank there, and then our parachutes. and we're going to do our drogue parachutes first. Now, I happen to know, again, because I've been doing this for a while, this design is dramatic overkill for doing a flyby of the moon. We could probably enter orbit around the moon and return using this rocket. However, in presenting you this design, and hopefully, you're maybe following along or getting some ideas, I want to give you some margin for error. Since your flight trajectory might not necessarily be perfect, it might need some adjustments en route, this will be a very safe design that provides more than enough thrust to get our rocket to the moon and back. So we're going to save again and launch. Okay, out here on the launch pad. Now, it's not enough just to be able to get enough delta V energy to fly to the moon. We have to actually aim our rocket correctly to get to the moon. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, we've upgraded our tracking center, so we're going to get some additional options when we're in this map view. So I'm going to click on the moon and set it as a target. Now, if you look down here on my nav ball, I've got some additional indicators there. You can't see the other one because it's on the other side of the nav ball, but if I forward time, you'll be able to see it. There's this triangle one, which is showing me the opposite direction, pointed away from my target. And then I have this pink circular indicator, which is showing me the direction to my target. So for example, right now, the moon is almost directly overhead. So it's showing me, again, this is the direction I'm pointing. There's my target. The moon is almost directly overhead. Now, this is not how we want to launch. You do not want to launch your rocket just pointing directly up at the moon. That's not going to work. The reason is it takes us a little while to get there. And during the time that we're flying to the moon is going to move. If we go into this map view and we speed up time, you're going to see that the moon is moving as our planet is rotating and as our rocket would be traveling. So the way that you want to think about planning a flight like this is you don't want to point at the moon and go. You want to plan to intercept the moon. So the way that I do this is, if you look at the nav ball down here, I try and do my launch when my targeting the moon is 90 degrees directly on the horizon. And the reason is, when we burn and we achieve orbit, we're going to have that circular orbital path. If we burn while our spacecraft is down here, it'll extend our altitude in this direction as we get traveling faster. And I'm going to plan, like with this setup, I'm going to plan to use some roughly 90-degree angles where I'm going to be burning here so that my altitude increases this way. And by the time I fly out to this point, the moon will have caught up and its gravity is going to catch me. Now, this is not the optimal way to do this. This is the quick and easy way that doesn't require any math. And if you remember, I mentioned our rocket has some overkill and some safety margins built in, so we can screw this up and still be able to get to the moon. I know that there's already some people who are experienced players who are going to be furiously typing in the comments that I'm doing this wrong. Don't worry. This is covering the quick and easy, the basic way, just to get from point A to point B. Now let's launch. Now, we've got all 5 rockets going, and if you look down here on your staging display, you're going to notice that the bottommost engine is our center engine. If we highlight it, it highlights green over here, is draining fuel slower than our 4 booster engines. So this display knows that we still have reserve fuel for that center engine we haven't touched yet. So we're going to start to angle over, and the rocket is wobbling a little bit, but that's okay. We're just going to manually keep our trajectory straight, steering with the WASD, Q, and E keys to get us towards that nice 45-degree angle of ascent. Now here's something important. We switched to the map view. We increased our tracking center, so now we have an apoapsis showing us our maximum potential altitude as our mission proceeds. That is an extremely useful indicator. And the reason is, once our apoapsis hits about 100,000 meters, we're going to want to change our trajectory and start burning directly to the east. So now we want to start burning directly to the east towards the moon. And we're about to jettison our side boosters there. Ditch the dead weight. Now this is the point where it looks like we're just burning directly in the direction of the moon. But what we're actually doing is burning so that our apoapsis will increase in this direction on the opposite side of the planet from the direction we're burning. So that when we get out to this point, the moon will have moved and its gravity is going to catch us. So we're going to speed up time a little bit using our time warp up here as our engine burns and our apoapsis increases. All right, slow down time. We're being careful with our engine throttle. Okay, so now the moon is going to catch us. So this is what these colored lines indicate. And we get this because of our upgraded tracking station. With level 1, we wouldn't have this. This blue line indicates our flight trajectory without any external interference, without crashing into anything, without gravitational pull from any other celestial bodies, without interacting with an atmosphere, without docking. This is just where we're going to go. This yellow tan line shows that we're going to intersect what's called the sphere of influence of the moon. We're going to get close enough where its gravitational pull is going to influence our trajectory. This purple line shows us what our trajectory is going to look like after we exit the gravitational pull of the moon. So from this point, I'm going to jettison the dead weight of this first rocket stage because we don't need it anymore. And you're going to notice we got some fuel left. You know, we over-engineered this rocket with a lot of room to spare. So if you got to this point and that first stage is empty and you needed to go into the second rocket, don't worry too much. It's not going to be a real big problem. So now what we're going to do is we're going to time warp a little bit until we get up to about here. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that flying in space high above Kerbal, and we're pretty high, is its own situation. So we're going to get some science from space high above Kerbal. And when we land and retrieve all this science, we're going to complete that contract for getting science from space around Kerbal. And, of course, we're going to recover all of this data, which is going to be very, very good for our science total. Now, I'm going to right-click on my science container and collect all. That's going to scoop up all that science so that when we land and we go to re-enter the atmosphere and jettison this stage, we can still take the science with us. Now I'm going to speed up a little bit more. Now we have entered the gravitational pull of the moon. So it doesn't look like we're very close, but the moon is a big chunk of rock. So we're close enough for its gravity to alter our flight path. And again, you see here, the blue is showing our current flight path without any interference or changes from anything else. And then the orange is going to be what we get when we escape the gravitational pull of the moon and the gravitational pull of our home planet Kerbal takes over. So we're going to skip ahead just a little bit and get a little bit more inside the sphere of influence. And then we're going to gather our science from space around the moon. We'll do our crew report, and we'll collect that. Our material study. Do our goo. And our barometer and thermometer. That's going to be a whole bunch of science. And again, we're going to collect all. Now we're going to time warp a little bit. And again, the spacecraft, if we had flown this a little bit more carefully and we had kept that first booster stage, we would have more than enough delta V to enter orbit around the moon. So if you're following along, you can actually reuse this rocket and launch it a second time without really making too many changes, and use it for an orbital mission as well. We're not going to do that here, but just know that you can. So here we've completed our flyby of the moon, and look at that! There's a shadow of the moon on our home planet. How cool is that? Oh, I love the visuals in this. Let's just watch that for a second. Whee! There it goes. All right, so all the Kerbals down there, we're getting a nice eclipse. Okay, so now you can see our apoapsis is 12 million meters. It's quite a bit. And our periapsis is still going to be pretty high above the planet. So how do we get back down and land? Well, as this stands, because of the time and everything we launched, we're going to land on the night side of the planet. That's okay. So we're going to fast forward a little bit until we're closer to our apoapsis. And the reason is, I'm not going to get into the math behind it, but burning at your apoapsis and periapsis is generally the most fuel-efficient way to do it. So I'm going to angle retrograde into the circle with the 3 prongs and the X. And I'm going to burn my engine. And don't worry about this. You're going to see it's going to lower my periapsis. And if you remember from episode 2, I usually try and aim for a periapsis of around 30,000 meters. So if you look down here, I'm just using very small throttle movements to very carefully control my periapsis there, letting it slowly burn to about 30,000. Now, if we were coming in from a much farther distance, like orbit around the sun or something, we might have to plan this a little bit differently, this re-entry angle. But just for a mission to the moon and back, this is a perfectly safe way to do it. So now we are all set on our return trajectory. Now I'm going to speed up time a bit. And you want to be careful not to speed up time too much, because if you stay in the time warp for too long, you'll actually burn up in the atmosphere and explode. Long story short is that Kerbal Space Program handles physics and everything a little bit differently based on how you're time warping. So about here, I like to come back in to our regular view and use the time warp from here, so that we can watch our altitude a little bit more carefully. And once I get to about 100,000 is when I want to stop, jettison my little booster stage there, orient ourselves, retrograde, and you can see, ooh, the heat shield's already starting to glow, because we're coming in from the moon, so we're traveling at a much higher speed than we were just landing from orbit. So we're already generating a ton of extra heat. And you can see the ablator is going to start going down real fast as we get into the atmosphere. So we can speed this up a little bit. Yeah, look at that. The ablator's already going down. And if we hit M, you can see the friction from the atmosphere is slowing us down enough where we're no longer orbital. We're now on a suborbital trajectory, which is going to be a good, safe trajectory to come in and land. Our parts aren't overheating. We don't have an overheating bar over anything because the ablative heat shield was doing its job and flaking off heated particles to move the heat away from the spacecraft. Now, we're at night, so I can't see where I'm going here down on the planet. I'm going to switch from the above sea level to the above ground level. And I'm going to do that just to make sure that we're not coming down on like a high mountain or something, and that I don't misjudge when to deploy my parachutes. That ends up being pretty important. So it looks like we're probably coming in over the desert, maybe? So we've already got our drogues out. We're slowed down quite a bit. So I can drop my main chute a little bit lower than I normally would. And I will fast forward this just so we don't have to sit here in silence as we land. So there we have it. We've landed down here in the desert. We can recover our vessel. And now, from that flyby of the moon, we've got 305 science, 700,000 funds, and we gain some reputation for Jebediah Kerman. What a rewarding mission. So if we go into our messages, our world first milestones, we set a whole bunch of records which gave us huge rewards. We can delete all that. We explored the moon. We explored the moon. We did the science data from space around Kerbal. We explored the moon and explored the moon. So we completed those contracts and got all of the rewards from our Kerbal exploration. So we can get rid of that. So from this point, we can start researching some of this extra stuff here. You can start playing around with unmanned probe cores and solar panels to make communication satellites, or you can start trying to make a moon landing mission with like some of these landing legs and larger rockets, for example. You can start playing around with some of the larger crew pods. This is really where the game opens up. Once you've completed that first flyby of the moon, you have enough science to unlock like 3 or 4 of this level of technology, and you have enough funds to, you know, start like upgrading some of your other buildings to level 2 and level 3 if you wanted to. That's when your career mode is really going to open up, and you can be a little bit more freeform in the direction you're going. So that's going to wrap up this quick 3-part series for a complete beginner's guide to Kerbal Space Program. I hope this was educational for you and whet your appetite to exploring the Kerbal solar system. As always, thanks for watching.